Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, it's strange to think, but sometimes the most unassuming people can harbor some really dark secrets.
Hmm.
Today we're diving into the case of Joe Metheny,
Oh,
a
yes.
man who really blended into the Baltimore landscape
Right.
back in the 90s, all while committing these horrific acts.
Yeah, what's really striking is the contrast
Right,
between Metheny's outward persona and the brutality of his crimes. He was, by many accounts, a friendly guy,
right.
even jovial, kind of a guy you might chat with at a bar,
Yeah.
share a laugh with at work. But beneath that surface
Yeah.
lurked this capacity for violence. I mean, it shocked even seasoned investigators.
Exactly, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Right.
And frankly, a bit unnerving. We'll be looking at court documents,
Okay.
psychological reports,
Yeah.
first-hand accounts to try and understand the man behind the monster.
And that's key understanding. We're not here to sensationalize or glorify his actions, but rather to unravel the complexities of his life and the factors that may have contributed to his descent into darkness.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Metheny's childhood is shrouded in these conflicting narratives. He claimed a history of abuse and neglect, bouncing between homes.
Yeah.
But his mother painted a very different picture, describing him as a relatively normal kid, good student, stayed out of trouble.
That discrepancy is crucial. It really is. It speaks to a potential pattern of manipulation and distortion of the truth.
Well,
Individuals who commit violent acts, they often construct these narratives to justify or minimize their actions, you see, shifting blame or garnering sympathy. It's possible Metheny was already engaging in this behavior early on.
it's almost like he was crafting a backstory, a foundation for the character he would later become.
Yeah.
And adding another layer to this is his military service. He claimed to have served in Vietnam,
Yeah.
battled heroin addiction there, but his mother confirmed he was actually stationed in Germany.
Interesting. What's interesting is that regardless of the location, Metheny's time in the military appears to be a turning point.
Yeah.
His relationship with his family deteriorated, his struggle with addiction intensified. It's certainly possible that his experiences, whether in combat or simply the upheaval of military life, exacerbated existing vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
or perhaps triggered latent tendencies towards violence.
So we have this potentially troubled individual battling personal demons. And then in 1994, the first documented murder occurs.
Right.
Tony Lynn Ingracia, a woman struggling with addiction herself, becomes his victim. Her body was discovered along a Baltimore interstate, bearing the grim marks of a brutal attack.
This victim profile, women struggling with addiction often involved in sex work,
Right.
becomes a recurring theme in Metheny's crimes.
Yeah.
It suggests he deliberately targeted individuals he perceived as vulnerable, less likely to be missed,
Yeah.
or have their disappearances thoroughly investigated.
That's right.
It's a chilling pattern. It speaks to this calculated cruelty that goes beyond impulsive rage.
And the violence doesn't stop there. He's later connected to the murders of Catherine Magaziner and Kimberly Spicer, both killed in equally horrific ways. But before we delve into those cases, let's talk about this terrifying encounter Metheny had with a woman named Rita Kemper, someone he knew socially. She narrowly escaped his attack, having to scale a 10-foot pallet and jump a barbed wire fence to get away.
That incident is critical because it shatters the facade of the affable, easygoing guy. It reveals the raw, unbridled violence simmering beneath the surface.
Right.
It also underscores the premeditated nature of his attacks.
Yeah.
This wasn't some random act of passion. It was a deliberate attempt to take a life.
It's a chilling reminder that evil can wear a friendly face, that the people we encounter in our daily lives might harbor these dark secrets
Right.
we can't even fathom. But this attack, as horrifying as it was, ultimately led to Metheny's arrest for the murder of Kimberly Spicer. And with his arrest, a floodgate of confessions opened, each more disturbing than the last.
And these confessions, as we'll explore, offer a glimpse into the mind of a killer, seeking not just to kill, but to shock,
Yeah.
to horrify,
Yeah.
to become a macabre legend. His confessions were a bizarre mix
Right.
of truth embellishment and outright fabrication.
Yeah.
I mean, while some details aligned with the evidence,
Right.
others seem designed purely for shock value.
Yeah.
It really raised questions about his motivations
Right.
and the reliability of his accounts.
That's like he was crafting a narrative,
Right.
almost a performance for his interrogators. He confessed to killing anywhere from 7 to 10 people, but investigators could only link him definitively to 3 murders.
This discrepancy, you see, speaks to a psychological phenomenon, often observed in serial killers, the desire for infamy, for notoriety.
Yeah.
They crave not just the act of killing, but the fear and fascination their crimes evoke in the public. It's a perverse form of immortality.
And the most sensational and frankly stomach-churning detail was his claim of cannibalizing his victims
Right.
and serving their remains at a food stand he supposedly ran. It's a claim that captured headlines and cemented his image as a monster in the public imagination.
The human meat burger story, as it became known, was never substantiated.
Right.
No physical evidence, no corroborating witnesses, nothing to support its validity.
Yeah.
It seems highly likely that this was a fabrication, a gruesome detail concocted to amplify his notoriety and horrify the public.
But even if it was a lie, the impact was undeniable.
Sure.
It played into our deepest fears, our primal anxieties about what might be lurking in the food we consume. It's a testament to the power of suggestion, the way even unfounded claims can lodge themselves in our collective psyche.
Precisely. The human mind is wired to remember the unusual, the shocking, the grotesque. It's an evolutionary adaptation that helps us avoid danger.
Right.
But in this case, it served to distort the narrative, overshadowing the real victims and the brutality of his proven crimes.
Speaking of the victims, let's talk about Catherine Magaziner.
Okay.
Her case was particularly complex because Metheny initially buried her body, then later exhumed it and reburied it. This made it difficult for investigators to determine which injuries were inflicted by him versus natural decomposition.
That's where forensic science played a crucial role. A forensic anthropologist, Dr. William Rodriguez, was brought in to examine Magaziner's remains. His expertise was critical in establishing a timeline of events and identifying injuries consistent with Metheny's confession.
It's amazing how science can cut through the fog of deception, providing objective evidence even when the perpetrator tries to obfuscate the truth. But even with clear evidence, Metheny's trials were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and conflicting narratives.
His defense attorney, Margaret Mead, initially questioned the validity of his confessions,
Right.
citing his mental state and history of drug use. This is a common tactic in cases with overwhelming evidence of guilt, attempting to portray the defendant as someone not fully in control of their actions, seeking to mitigate the severity of the punishment.
But then she also stated that she had no reason not to believe him. So which was it?
Yeah.
Did she believe his confessions or not?
That contradiction highlights the ethical tightrope defense attorneys often walk. They have a duty to zealously represent their client, but also to maintain a degree of objectivity and integrity within the bounds of the law. It's a complex and challenging role.
It certainly is. But in the end, the legal system prevailed. Metheny was found guilty of Kimberly Spicer's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But in the case of Catherine Magaziner, the jury handed down a death sentence.
The death penalty decision sparked a great deal of debate. Some argued that it was a just punishment for the brutality of his crimes, while others raised concerns about the morality and effectiveness of capital punishment.
And ultimately, the death sentence was vacated by the Maryland Court of Appeals. They determined that while Metheny was guilty of both murder and robbery, the robbery was not the primary motive for the killing.
Right.
It was more of an afterthought, a way to dispose of evidence and acquire some cash.
This legal technicality, the fact that the robbery was not considered an aggravating circumstance, ultimately spared Metheny from execution. It's a reminder that the law, while striving for justice, can sometimes be bound by technicalities that may not align with public perception or the emotional weight of a case.
So back to prison, he went to serve out his life sentence. But before his death in 2017, he offered up yet another confession this time, involving a fabricated son and a revenge plot.
Wow.
It seemed like a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, to create a justification for his actions, even as the curtain was closing on his life.
This late-stage confession, lacking any corroboration, further illustrates his manipulative tendencies and his desire to shape the narrative surrounding his crimes. Even in confinement, he sought to exert control to craft his legacy, however twisted it may be.
It's a chilling reminder that some individuals, even in the face of undeniable evidence and punishment, will continue to manipulate and deceive, seeking validation or justification even in the darkest of deeds.
And it's in those murky waters of manipulation and self-deception that we must navigate as we try to understand the complexities of cases like Joe Metheny's.
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. With each new revelation, we get a glimpse into a darker and more disturbing reality. But amidst all this focus on Metheny himself, it's crucial to remember the human cost of his actions.
Absolutely. The victims, Tony Lynn Ingrasha, Catherine Magaziner, Kimberly Spicer,
Right.
these weren't just names on a case file. They were daughters' friends, people with hopes and dreams that were brutally cut short.
Yeah. Kimberly Spicer's mother mentioned in an interview that she and Kimberly had argued before she disappeared, but that Kimberly always came back.
Oh, wow.
It's heartbreaking to think of that mother's hope turning to despair as the truth of her daughter's fate came to light.
These stories really underscored the ripple effect of such crimes. The trauma extends far beyond the immediate victims, impacting families, friends, entire communities.
Yeah.
We can't forget the human toll, the lives shattered and the grief left behind.
And it makes you wonder, what about the people who interacted with Metheny regularly? Did they ever suspect anything was amiss?
Hmm.
Or were they completely blindsided by his crimes?
That's a question that likely haunts those who knew him. How could someone so seemingly ordinary be capable of such extraordinary evil?
Right.
It really challenges our perceptions of good and evil, reminding us that darkness can sometimes hide beneath the most unassuming exteriors.
It's unsettling, to say the least. Joe Metheny died in prison in 2017 under what were described as mysterious circumstances. The cause of death was never publicly released, which just adds another layer of intrigue to this already perplexing case.
It's almost fitting, isn't it? Even in death, Joe Metheny remains an enigma.
Right.
He took his secrets, his true motivations to the grave. We're left to grapple with the pieces of the puzzle, trying to make sense of the senseless.
So where does this leave us? What can we take away from this deep dive into the darkness that was Joe Metheny?
Well, his case serves as a chilling reminder that monsters don't always lurk in shadows. They can walk among us, appearing as friends, coworkers, even charming strangers.
Right.
It underscores the importance of awareness, intuition, and trusting our gut instincts.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one. And with that, we wrap up our exploration into the disturbing world of Joe Metheny, a man whose crimes continue to cast a shadow, reminding us that evil can wear many faces. Subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations into the dark side of history and the human psyche.